Hello and welcome to All Hands on Tech, where today's leaders talk tomorrow's technology. I'm Daniel Blazer. In case you missed it, April 23rd was Tech Skills Day. For the second year in a row, we spent the day celebrating the power that technology skills have to transform lives. This year, we marked the event with an epic 5-hour live stream featuring some of the most interesting names in technology. The next couple of weeks, we're bringing you the audio from these interviews, starting with Yang and Deborah Kurata. Andrew is an entrepreneur, former U.S. presidential candidate, and founder of Venture for America. Deborah is a well-known developer, consultant, and Pluralsight Angular author. We hope you enjoy both of their conversations with Hank Green, a popular YouTube producer from channels like Crash Course and SciShow.
And how you doing?
Yes, I'm doing well. I love your bookshelf. That makes you seem so erudite.
Yeah, well, this is like the comics shelf, so it's not that erudite.
Still counts. Comics are
still counts. Absolutely. So the first question I have on my list here is what you've been up to?
I've been really busy. I'm part of several campaigns trying to get money into people's hands. My organization, Humanity Forward, has distributed $1.4 million in economic relief. Still going. So if you want to help someone, donate at movehumanityforward.com. I'm also at part of Project 100, which is putting $100 million into 100,000 struggling Americans' hands. Andrew Yang is the free money guy. You got to give people money. So
got to fill that brand.
Yeah, I'm working with policymakers and members of Congress trying to put universal basic income through at least for the duration of this crisis. I'm in touch with the Biden campaign trying to help him defeat Trump. There's a lot of stuff going on. This is a really, really tough time for the country, so we all have to do everything we can.
Right. And I mean, UBI isn't the only thing, or the freedom dividend isn't the only thing you championed. So I want to talk a little bit about your campaign's technology plan for things like artificial intelligence. Why is that a thing the government needs to be taking stock of, and how do we need to be doing that right now?
Well, there are at least three major issues around artificial intelligence that I was deeply concerned about. Number one is that it's going to replace a lot of people's jobs, and it's already happening in some contexts in big companies where AI is replacing back office clerical workers, a lot of financial firms, and it was just going to accelerate. So that was concern number one. Concern number two is the one that's shared by some of the senior-most technologists, which is that if you have AI development that goes awry, you could break something very, very big, and you might not know what had happened until a little bit too late. So I had some very, very famous technologists, including Elon Musk, tell me, look, on this one, you kind of need some guardrails, because the competitive dynamics are that you go as fast as possible. And then if everyone's going as fast as possible, then someone's going to do something regrettable. The third thing is that China is positioned to potentially leapfrog us in AI because they have more access to more data than we do. They have very few compunctions about using that data, very little privacy, and they have equivalent or superior computing infrastructure than we do, because the Chinese government essentially just writes a blank check and supplies billions of dollars worth of servers and infrastructure to its private firms in a way that even our biggest private companies can't. So those are three of my big concerns around AI. All that said, AI could be awesome. It could help us cure cancer, address climate change, solve some very, very big problems. But there are some things to be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, the concern that, you were looking at the future and saying like, okay, well, the only incentive is to go as fast as you can and break as much as you can along the way, because we've seen the last 15 years of Silicon Valley, and the people who move the fastest are the ones who come out on top. That is true of every industry right now. Why is it particularly concerning with AI?
It is true. And we're having problems, not just in tech. I mean, you have industrial firms that have pushed the envelope in various ways. But in AI, it's particularly concerning because if you were to unleash AI in a way that was not properly controlled, it could wreak havoc on an existing system. It could shut down your infrastructure. It could be used. Someone compared it to a highly efficient weapon, like if it was in the wrong hands. And so the destructive potential is just higher for AI than it is for many other technologies.
Yeah.
Again, not to scare people, because I'm pro progress and AI is potentially an awesome
game changing. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. So I make content for young people. That's part, like, I've been doing it for a long time. It's something that I've seen a lot of the power of technology to make really positive impacts in people's lives, particularly young people, but also really negative impacts.
Are you a parent yourself?
I am. I have a 3-year-old son.
I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, so we're right there with you. Both boys.
Yeah, he doesn't interface with technology too much yet, but
good for you. That's good parenting. Listen to Hank.
I'm just curious how we in this field can be more aware of our responsibility and take that responsibility more seriously, sort of our impact on society in general, but also particularly on young people.
This is such an important topic, Hank. I'm a parent, and the research shows that we've seen a surge in anxiety and depression and mental health problems. Teenagers, particularly teenage girls, that's coincident with smartphone adoption and screen time and social media use. And the people that are most vigilant about technology are people like you who know a lot about it. But if you're a time-strapped parent, it's the easiest thing in the world just to give the kid a screen when you're trying to eat a meal, when you're trying to do anything that's going to just essentially calm your child. And that's the reality. And the one thing I'm very passionate about is it's ridiculous to say, like, oh, it's on the parents. It's like, are you kidding me? You have these multi-billion or even trillion-dollar companies with the smartest people in the country trying to turn these supercomputers into dopamine delivery devices for kids. And the kids, when we're not all trapped in our homes, are like out on their own for like hours and hours, and they need the phone to socially function. We're outgunned. And so this has to be something where the government just has some role to say, look, your financial incentives are all in this direction. The health of our kids, unfortunately, cuts the other direction. So we're going to have to cut back a little bit on some of the extremes. And so there's a design ethicist, Tristan Harris, you probably know him, time well spent. I think that needs to be the guidepost for intelligent policy.
Is there ways that we internally inside of the industry, so obviously government has a role to play here, and I'm definitely in favor of that, but like what from the inside, what can we do? How can we put pressure on the leaders of these companies, whether we work there or whether we interface with them, to and I think that a lot of them do want to do the sort of right thing as long as it doesn't affect the bottom line too much.
Well, this is really what you just said at the end was like the key thing. And this is one of the things that I made on like the case I made on the campaign trail, is that people are going to do what their incentives suggest. And so if you're a company, I think that most people in most companies like are just like anyone else, where if you say, hey, like you want to like poison a lake, you'll be like, no. The problem is that we have very extreme financial incentives that cut in a particular direction. So inside the industry, here's this potentially controversial point of view I have, is that if you are in the industry, you have to come clean and say, look, all my incentives are going in this direction. So like we should probably like have some kind of counterweight. And come clean and say my organization's incentives are all to go as fast as possible, or to make my apps as engaging as possible, or to sell as much advertising revenue as possible. And so collectively, it's almost like your child who comes to you and says, hey, like, I'm not going to be able to control myself, so do me a favor and take this thing.
Yeah.
Make it. So that to me is actually a more honest, productive approach than saying like we're going to be able to moderate ourselves, despite the fact that all of our incentives are all in one direction.
Yeah, I mean it's great because they never say that, and they will never say that. But I think that like what I've seen is internally at some of these companies, when the employees get sort of all up in arms, like they do really care about preserving their workforce because it's expensive to replace employees. So employees do have some pressure that they can place over their CEOs. I don't necessarily see that it always is being organized in the right way, but like I think there's maybe some space for us to have a conversation about what labor looks like in the technology landscape and how that labor can organize not just to help the employees because they actually are pretty well taken care of, but to help society.
That's a very great point, Hank. Because the truth is most tech firms really do listen to their employees because their employees are the big value drivers in many cases. Like if you have this army of talented people that's really your product in many firms. And so if you have a critical mass of your employees who say, hey, we disagree with this practice, they will listen. I think that's a great point. The key really is to focus on the right battles, and say like, look, like this is something we can really make a difference on.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's Venture for America up to right now? What's it doing?
Venture for America, I am so proud of it, and it is like many other organizations right now. We're trying to figure out this environment because it's difficult to, for example, convene hundreds of new recruits in one place, traditionally Detroit, if everyone's stuck at home. It's hard to have dozens or hundreds of firms around the country onboard people and recruit if we're all stuck at home and many firms don't have clear visibility into what the future holds. This is actually something I'm deeply concerned about. It's why I started Venture for America, is that we need to cultivate entrepreneurship in this country. The statistics are staggeringly bleak, where young people aren't starting businesses at the same rates as prior generations. And one of my great fears is that this coronavirus crisis is going to stifle entrepreneurship for a generation. Because if you look out and you see some of the small businesses that are getting pummeled right now, it's like that person who was like taking a risk, like trying to start their restaurant or a bar or a food truck or whatever it is, like now you're just getting blasted out of existence. If you're a young person, the lesson you're getting from this is that, maybe we should play it safe. I mean, I'm worried about my own kids. My kids are introverts generally. And so, I feel like this is not to say there's nothing wrong with introverts. I love introverts. But
good save.
But like this environment is not exactly like good for kids to learning how to like take risks, stumble, and potentially go out on their own.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, we've seen in previous economic crises that when people are sort of don't have any other way, that they start to figure out new ways of making money. And that's not going to be something that you need to be looking at things that have really low barriers to entry, where you make money from the first sale kind of businesses. And those are more available now. Those are things that exist more now. But like you are right that anybody who started a ice cream shop in the last 5 years is pretty in trouble. And like that is a lot of American business, is small businesses like that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, it's one of my visions, Hank, is that we can rewrite the economy in a hurry on the way out to like give us a chance to rebuild. Not say like, oh, if we can just go back to normal. There is no going back to normal. We need a massive society-wide initiative like the Marshall Plan to help rebuild an economy so that people have a real path forward.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got a question from the audience here that is in this vein. So given that COVID will push automation even faster now, that many people are out of work, so that probably makes UBI even more relevant. How do you get the tech industry as a whole to be a champion of UBI now more than ever?
I love this question, obviously. And I'm happy to say that there are many people in the tech industry that supported my campaign and supported universal basic income. And now I think that support is close to a consensus, where I saw that the majority of Americans now believe that we should have cash in people's hands ongoing. And that was the population at large. I have a feeling that it's even higher among the tech industry. So we'd certainly love for people in the industry to come out and say, we should have universal basic income. And I think that perspective is very powerful, because I cannot tell you, when I was campaigning, I must have had hundreds of people come up to me and say, my job has been to automate away other people's jobs for quite some time. And I have supported your campaign because I know what I'm doing. I know what we're doing. So we should just it's a little bit like what we said before, is as long as you own what you're doing, then we have a chance to make progress. And I think that if your job is to automate other people's jobs away, that's not intrinsically a negative thing. Some of these jobs.
Yeah, it's how people add value. It's one of the main throughout history. Agriculture automated people's jobs away.
Yeah, and it made the industry more, grew more food. So one of the things I've said, and this is just a sign of how messed up our thinking is, it's not the innovator's responsibility to figure out the downstream impact 6 states away, of what they're working on. That's impossible. They have a handful just trying to make their own thing work. It's theoretically our society's or our government's role to figure out what the downstream impacts are, and then help people have paths forward, make it so that we'd actually be excited about autonomous vehicles instead of having people freaking out that their livelihood's about to disappear. I mean, so the techies that I've talked to, what's great, Hank, is that they used to just say it to me in private, being hey, yeah, FYI, this is what we're doing, or this is what I'm doing. But now they say it publicly, because they're just look, at this point, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, and I mean, also, this is even without an actual freedom dividend or UBI kind of system, we're going to do a little bit of a test of that right now, where a lot of people are going to have unemployment that is comparable with the amount of money that they would be making if they were employed, and hopefully this first $1,000 payment will not be the only one. So maybe we get some data on what because I think that culturally, we're not entirely sure what impact this has, but we get a chance to test it.
Well, yeah, tens of millions of Americans are getting $1,200 in their bank accounts right now. And one thing I'm confident of, they're going to like it.
Yeah.
But they're also going to see it's hey, it didn't change my personality. It didn't make my neighbor feel about it's just helping me pay for groceries and pay last month's rent.
So another thing that we're thinking about right now a lot is going to be telehealth. It's already happening. It has to be happening right now. I have done a telehealth appointment for the first time in my life during this. What do you think is needed in the telehealth sector to make us better at healthcare, to make us better at serving our communities?
I worked in healthcare technology for 4 years. Most people don't know that. I have stories to tell. But I used to joke that healthcare is where good ideas go to die.
Yeah, now, I hear that.
So why do I say that? The problem really lies around the structure of incentives. Is that if I'm delivering healthcare in a particular way and I'm making money, then my incentives to change my practices are not really clear. And so because right now the measurements aren't built around keeping you healthy, Hank, keeping me healthy, keeping us out of the hospital. The system's revenue is essentially correlated to activity. And so if I go in and you do more to me, then you made more money. And theoretically that helped me, but maybe there was a way to help me that involved less activity. Maybe there was a way to help me that involved my never going to the hospital in the first place. And so the big catalyst for telehealth, aside from this pandemic, is going to be if we actually have structural incentives around effective delivery of healthcare services and guidance that is not tied right now to revenue generating activity. And that this is the problem in healthcare, because we're already spending 18-20% of GDP on healthcare to worse results than other countries because of this set of incentives I'm describing. If you do more, you get paid more. So let's do more and get paid more and do more. And then, unfortunately, what does that also mean? That means that if you're a poor Black community in Mississippi right now, struggling, we're not getting services to you, like your health does not actually go into our measurements. It's like I didn't make money off of you. Fine. You didn't have any money to begin with. So like, I mean, it's very dark, but that's just.
Yeah, no, it is dark. And like you say that we spend more money to worse results, but that's not true if you're in the top quintile. Like those people, the average 50-year-old woman in America in the top quintile is probably going to live to be longer than the average person in Japan. Like the healthcare system works very well if you have money, a lot of money.
It does not. You're right. Like, we spend more money to worse results society-wide. But certainly if you are in a particular socioeconomic band, then, you're getting what you need.
That is something for us all to grapple with and look at. And I think that the healthcare industry needs to look at that as well, because they're, first do no harm. Like that's what they do. And if that's not what the system is doing right now, the system does need to deeply change.
I can just say a little bit more on that. It's like, why do we have a constant undersupply of doctors? Like, do we have a shortage of young people that want to be doctors? No. No. I know exactly why. I'm in the education industry, so this is my fight. This is the thing I'm mad about. You know why? Organic chemistry. You know why? Because we don't start new medical schools in America. You know why? Because like it's too expensive, and it's and it's designed to be exclusive, and it's designed to create scarcity, which is not what you want to do with healthcare. Sorry, now I'm being the president's candidate. Yeah, this is exactly right, and this is the way where it's cutting in the opposite direction of telehealth. You know what I mean? Like this is something where technology could make a big difference. Where if you have telehealth for existing doctors, but also you could have like AI diagnosticians, like doing triage, and like if you have a routine condition, you never actually needed to talk to a human. But can you imagine the medical lobby looking at that? They'd be like no, it must be a human. And you're like, does it really? Like,
yeah. And like these problems are problems that technology could help solve. But like we, as you say, it's a great thing. Like healthcare is where technology solutions, like good ideas, come to die. But I do want to get back onto a more tech skills radar. I got a question that I really love. Somebody asks, where do you find user experience designers fitting into roles in government? And would you utilize design thinking sessions in your administration if and when you have one? And I think this is so important that we think about UX in government, that we think about how as technologists we can provide services for government, because government is the place that actually serves all people, not just customers.
I love this question so much, and I would utilize design thinking and user interface design at every point in government, because this is what's missing, really. It's like if you have a difficult experience trying to navigate the IRS or the DMV or whatever it is, like it's not like you have an alternate IRS or DMV to go to, like that. And so there's like this, well, you don't have a choice. And if we're just behind the times on, the other thing is like, we just make everything so complex at that. And like, I hear this from people who interact with government at every level. Right now, we're struggling because the state unemployment offices can't process our claims. I just saw, they said they have 1,000 people answering phones in New York trying to process claims. And then part of me was like, well, that's better than having fewer than 1,000 people answering the phone. But like, why is it that people necessarily need to like call? Like, what information do you need precisely that like we can't get from? So the principles of design thinking would be front and center in my administration. My legacy would be that that government is easier to use. Actually, I hope to have lots of legacies. One will be giving everyone money. Two will be organizing the economy around how we and our families are doing. But somewhere on that list would be ease of use of government, because I'm a frustrated citizen just like the rest of you. And working in technology, that things could be designed much more efficiently, elegantly, simply, and be more user-friendly than they are.
Yeah. And Code for America is doing great work on that front. There are organizations working on this, so you should check them out if you're interested in that.
I love Code for America. They have been working on this for years. I'm a big fan of Jens and the whole squad.
I love that we have a mutual friend. Oh, that's great. So I'm also curious about the future of politics in America, how that intersects with artificial intelligence and technology generally, like whether that's this election or whether that's the next 20.
Well, I'm very much focused on the immediate future of politics, which is what the heck happens in the fall. And technology is going to play a role in that. One, I mean, we're going to use this awesome technology called the mail, hopefully.
we better, yeah.
Oh, this is like a big deal, because can you imagine trying to run an election under current circumstances? So we need to make sure people can vote remotely. And right now, you imagine it might be on your smartphone, but that's not realistic. Like vote by mail is going to be the best thing we could pull off in this time frame. The other big element of technology is going to be how the heck are we messaging? Because a lot of the traditional ways of convening large rallies and having giant crowds and getting together and doing traditional media, a lot of that's out the window, obviously. And so right now, the Democratic Party is trying to figure out how it can hit its message in a current environment. And so that's going to be podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, everything else. Pretty much any way to reach people right now, you're going to see significant investments in.
That's I completely agree, and I'm also worried about the role that technology plays in sort of information and misinformation more now than ever.
Yeah, it's a major problem. You had some foreign misinformation in the last election, almost certainly, and then because there were...
And it worked, so they're not going to stop.
They're going to stop now? I mean, of course not. The other thing I want to just take this opportunity to say is, like, how the heck has Congress not authorized itself to vote remotely? The whole thing is insane. It's like every organization... Can you imagine your organization if they were like, hey, you have to come into the office for us to do anything? You'd be like, are you out of your mind? Like, and it's so anyway, like that to me is just mind blowing.
Well, we've got you for negative minutes now, but I'd want to ask you one more question, which is just tell me.
I'm in the heck out of this. I could talk to you all day.
Well, then I'm up for it some other time. What can you tell me, just a quick personal aside, what your first sort of experience or engagement was with technology?
My major early memories of technology are the Atari 2600. My dad bought it, and then we came downstairs, and my dad was playing Asteroids in like the middle of the night. I never seen that like in this state. It was like 3 a.m. I was like, what the hell's going on? But certainly from that point on, then it seemed like we could just do whatever with this Atari 2600. So it was Asteroids, Defender, Space Invaders, and I was a gamer for years after that.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, Andrew Yang, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time with us today, and letting me rant a little bit, but mostly I get to let you politely engage with the difficulties and injustices of the world right now.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Hank. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there. And technology has to be a key part of the that we all want to try and build for ourselves. Thank you all. Appreciate you all.
Now we're going to be chatting with Deborah Kurata, who's a developer, a consultant, and a Pluralsight Angular author. Deborah has done all kinds of amazing stuff for this community and helping people learn, and also being a champion for Angular. Hello, Deborah. How's it going?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm having a wild day talking to person after person, and it's been really fun. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, how you ended up where you're at now?
Well, as a child, I wanted to be a teacher, but I ended up with a degree in math and physics. There's not a whole lot you can do with an undergraduate physics degree, sort of surprisingly. Anyway, luckily I'd gotten a job at the computer lab at school, and so I had gotten some computer skills. At the computer lab, we not only helped other students, but we also developed computer-based training software. And so that was really fun. The woman who I worked for there, Judy Young, taught me structured coding. And that was just the most exciting thing because it allowed us to follow some consistent patterns. So I learned that I could solve puzzles all day and do it in an organized way. And I was just hooked. It was like programming was the coolest thing. So luckily for me, the industry was short on developers at the time. And so with just that little experience, I was able to get my first programming job. And I know this doesn't translate well internationally, but at my first programming job, I was making $13,000 a year. Several years later, I had the opportunity to move to the San Francisco Bay Area. And so got to work in Silicon Valley, and that was pretty exciting too, being kind of in the heart of things. But I had been working on digital equipment, the VAX machines. I don't know if anyone's familiar with those. And my new job required programming in C++ on a PC. So luckily, I was working with a guy named Carl Quinn. Some of you may know him from Java Posse. I don't know if you heard of that. It's a relatively well-known podcast that was going on for a while.
Cool.
So some of the viewers might know him. But with Carl's help, I learned C++ on the job, which was quite challenging. But very, very sadly, Carl just died of coronavirus.
Oh my God.
So that's very tragic. But after several years working with Carl at that company, the company was bought out by a company in Los Angeles, and we had the option to move to LA or lose our job. So there I was, 6 months pregnant, trying to find my next opportunity. Mm-hmm. And every interview I went into, the question would be, so what's your plan exactly? So I didn't end up getting a job. No one wanted to take a risk. So I started my own consulting company. And that was the best decision I had ever made, I guess. And I was able to grow the company and write books and start speaking. And then Pluralsight came along, and I was finally able to fulfill my childhood dream and become a teacher. So that's pretty exciting.
No, some of the people in the chat are saying you're a Pluralsight celebrity. They're all very excited to see you. So I am also. So you've been around for a while. It seems to me from your bio there. Can you tell me a little bit about how the programming world has changed since you started out in the industry? I mean, a little bit. I don't know there's probably a lot.
Well, for one thing, the salary rates have gone up a little bit. I don't know too many developers right now making $13,000 a year. But anyway, one of the really big changes that I've seen is how we're teaching programming to kids. I think that's amazing. I would have loved to have taught my kids programming. My kids are both adults now. But I sort of tried to with the tools that we had at the time. I voluntarily did a JavaScript after school course for the high school that my kids were going to, but it was really difficult to kind of get kids engaged in JavaScript, especially at the time. You could barely do video, let alone anything real fun. But today they're teaching 7-year-olds. You've got Minecraft and Scratchy, and it'll be really interesting to see what programming is going to be like when these kids all, move into their jobs and to see how that lifelong experience with software changes how they approach everything. So I think that's looking both at how things have changed and how things may continue to change, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, that's really interesting to sort of see it from an education angle. And it's super true that, when I look back at the sort of formative video games that sort of gave me an opportunity to play and create rather than just sort of like exist inside of a straight line. And it is true that those things still exist. They are different now, but Minecraft is certainly a great example of it. So this is a question that is important to me as a non-programmer and also important to developers and engineers as well. So I want to ask. So sometimes developers are asked to work on things that they sense are not going to work. Has that ever happened to you? And what should developers say when their leaders propose ideas that they're like, I don't think that's going to be a thing, especially if that person is me, who's asking that of some kind of engineer or architect. How do you deal with that?
Well, as a consultant, I've worked on a lot of projects, and that puts you in a little bit of a different position because you have more options. For example, I was approached by a client that wanted to build an application. That's kind of typical, and they wanted all sorts of supporting features in addition to their main line of business app. They wanted all the supporting stuff and a complete social platform. So they wanted it to have kind of like Twitter features in this whole thing. And it was just this huge app, and they had a really small time frame, got to get to market because we only have so much funding. And I recommended them going with a MVP, a minimal viable product, so that they could get, money coming in. Because if they put out the main thing, they could be starting to make money, and then they could leverage that into adding, the more complicated social features and all the additional add-ons and all of that kind of stuff. And, they said, no, it had to be the whole thing. And we ended up kind of parting ways. They came back a year later. They had nothing working. Yeah. They were running out of money. And could we then help them put together an MVP? Disappointingly, or maybe luckily, I'm not sure, we didn't have any availability at that time to help them. I don't think it ever came together. But I think one of the key things that developers are frequently asked to do is to do something that there isn't the time given to do adequately. So in general, requirements versus time is a key conflict between developers and the product people. We could possibly, make this software work, but not in the 2-week time frame that you're giving us. And a lot of times the dynamic is such that the developers don't feel like they have a say in what that time frame is, or can't go to the manager and say, there's no way we're going to finish this in 2 weeks. It'll be interesting with the recent, unplanned, very quick move to remote work, how this is changing, because, I'm sure anything that was supposed to be done in 2 weeks can't possibly, in a normal situation be done in 2 weeks. And now with, people dealing with so many, things right now, and it's a major effort just to try to go to the grocery store and come home and take off the mask and the gloves and take a shower and wash all of your clothes that you were wearing. And I mean, just everything is hard.
I have like 35 employees. And so it's very different from person to person. Some people are like set up for it psychologically and also physically. Some people live in small homes with small children, and it's just like, where am I supposed to sit to edit this video? And it's like that's part of, we don't think about a workplace as being democratizing, but in some ways it is, because it allows people who have different at-home situations to sort of have the same work situation. And that is not the case right now. So I want to talk a little bit about actual tech stuff. So I will be not an expert, so I will smile and nod and do my best to understand. But so you are known for your Angular expertise. Tell me what you like most about that framework.
Well, As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that I learned very early on was structured programming and good patterns. And it was really great to be able to pick up any piece of code and recognize that it, had a similar way to look. The patterns that Angular has are also very consistent. So you pick up a piece of Angular code and you know immediately where to start looking. So if somebody sends me their code or posts it on GitHub or whatever, any Angular developer can go up to that code and know where it starts. What is the first file you should go look at? What are the next files? Because it has a very consistent pattern that it uses. I also really like the MVVM model view model architecture that it follows for getting the templates, the visual part of the UI and the code part of the UI to work together. So you've got the template as the view, and then your code behind is responsible for making that view work. It gives it the data, it handles its events, and I really like that architecture. It's clean and it can be very powerful. I also lately, the last several years, been really into RxJS, which is reactive extensions. It's built into Angular, and you can use it just a little bit, or you can really dive into it. And recently I've been really diving into it and talking a lot about the power that it gives you. You can do, because the web is so reactive, using reactive extensions lets you be more reactive in the code as well, to react to what's going on in the UI, to reactively process data in multiple ways, to easily get data from multiple sources and merge them in a logical way for displaying in the view. And lastly, one of my favorite things is the Angular community. The Angular community is just an amazing bunch of people. They're kind and they're welcoming, and they're easy to talk to. I really miss seeing them at the many Angular meetups and conferences that they have. They have, zillions of conferences all over the globe. Last year I was in one in Malaysia and one in Copenhagen, and they literally are all over. Of course, not this year. But hopefully sometime, maybe next year, we'll be able to get the community physically together again. But I really like Angular for all of those things.
So React and Vue have come out fairly recently as kind of competitors to Angular. What do you think that Angular has an edge over them, and what do you think that is? And I'm not going to let you get away with saying the community, because we all know you love the community.
Community. I'm frequently asked this question, and one of the things I like to kind of compare it to is maybe like a restaurant. There are some people that like to go sit down and have a meal where it gives you everything. So it's got the right potato that goes, or rice or whatever that goes with whatever your main protein is, and the vegetable that complements it, and it all comes as one kind of unit. And there are other people that much prefer the buffet, where you go and you pick your own bits of salad that you want, and your own protein and your own starch or whatever. It's kind of the same way with Angular and React. With Angular, when you use Angular, you are getting everything. You get the router, you get the forms package, you get the HTTP package. There is kind of a prescribed way to code with Angular. Products like React are much more pick and choose. So you can pick which router you want. You can pick which HTTP package you want to use, and so on. So it depends on your preference of whether you'd like the kind of pick and choose kind of thing, or if you'd rather have, when you hire an Angular person, you know that they probably know the forms package, the HTTP package. When you hire a React developer, it's like, okay, well, we're using this HTTP technique. You don't know that. So there's a lot more variables, I guess, in that equation. But in the end, they all meet the same goals. They all satisfy your hunger, or satisfy the ability to develop your client-side web application. So in terms of results, they'll all get you there. It's the same reason why some of us drive a Tesla and others prefer a F-150. So it's just kind of a personal preference.
Cool. That made sense to me. Great. So is there anything you remember from your earlier days developing you think has gotten lost in current platforms and methods and approaches? Like anything that feels, you feel nostalgic for Vax ever? That was a community question from the chat, by the way. So thank you to whoever put that one in.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm actually only thinking of things the other way. I mean, back in the day, we didn't really have testing tools, and now they've got testing tools. And I worked at a power company. I won't mention which one it was. And their idea was, we don't need testing because we have users. And this was a power company. It's kind of scary. So I can't think of anything. Also at said power company, if you wanted to print something, you had to write a script. Literally, you couldn't just print. Yes, exactly. It was the most insane thing. I'm like, really? You have to, every time you have to write? Yeah, because you have to put the name of what you want to print. It was absurd. So I can't think of a single thing that seemed better. I mean, it wasn't simpler back then. I mean, I guess in some respects, because we didn't have to know how to do testing.
Yeah, that's great. I have nothing in my life that I'm not nostalgic for, so that sounds wonderful.
I wish my kids were little again, if that counts at all.
Oh, but God, yeah, my son is 3 right now, and I'm like, get no larger. You're perfect. Have fewer tantrums, though. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Do not freak out just because I don't have the right underwear right now for you. That's the fight we had this morning. Speaking of children, somebody asks, my son is using Code Combat in the 6th grade and is learning Python. What do you think is the benefit of these kinds of coding games? And do you recommend any other tools for kids?
I think that it's absolutely fabulous that kids are learning to code. And some of it is questionably really code. It depends, I guess, on your definition, but it's really helping you or them to think through logical problem solving. And that's really what software is. And, learning a specific language, to me, it's not necessarily helpful for a 7-year-old to learn C# because by the time that 7-year-old gets a job, it will be something completely different than what C# is now. At least I presume so. So I think teaching them some of the basics of thinking through logic puzzles and if kinds of concepts and, making things move based on, action and reaction kind of things, I think is very helpful to develop that way of thinking. I don't know, honestly, my kids are way into their 20s, so I don't have any experience with, current tools for younger kids. That might be a good Twitter question. But I think that they can only be helping. And I know that people have complained in the past about schools not providing enough programming incentives. And so it's kind of exciting right now with so much schooling from home that more of that seem to be fitting into some of the homeschooling. And that's pretty exciting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hit you with one more techie question here. So you teach courses on C# .NET and on Angular. Do you think there's a lot of overlap when it comes to those things? Can one master both of those things?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that I liked about Angular is that it really leveraged my C# skills. The Angular team decided really early on to leverage TypeScript. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, and it was designed by the same guy who did C# and who did Delphi. And so the familiarity, I mean, you start using TypeScript and it looks so much like C#. You're creating classes. And so you use the word export instead of public. We can all deal with that. We're software developers. You still import stuff just like you do in C#. You do, classes with properties and methods. And so the whole way of coding and thinking is pretty much the same, going from C# to Angular. It's really great to use C# on your back end because Angular is really only for the front end, for the part that the user sees, the web front end. But it still needs to hit a back end to request data, to maybe execute back end business processes, and you can do that in C#. So any kind of full stack developer would do well to be very comfortable with both, to be able to do the back end web API and then to do the front end Angular piece that can communicate with that web API.
Well, Deborah, thank you for sharing your insight, your expertise, and your skills, both with us here now and also with the communities that you work with and the teaching that you do. It's wonderful that you've seen so much success and celebrity in this community just by, fulfilling your childhood dream, but also making people's, helping people, be more effective in their careers, solve problems all over the world. So thank you so much for doing that work and for joining us here today.
Thank you very much for having me. And for everyone out there, stay safe. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to All Hands on Tech. You can find show notes and more info at pluralsight.com/podcast. If you're interested in watching the recording of our 5-hour Tech Skills Day live stream, we've included a link to that in the show notes.